Hello, and welcome to the Steel Woman podcast. I'm your host, Osley, and today I'm holding this very cute, very small microphone because I think the audio will be better, but I'm also going to try to keep my voice kind of low because I don't want to blow this microphone out. Last episode, we talked about the born-again experience that I had when I was a child, around 9 or 10 years old, and how I view that now as a former Christian. And I stopped talking right before, sorry, it takes me like a moment to warm up. I've noticed that at the beginning of recording, I talk really slow and deliberately, and then towards the end, I'm like rattling off a mile a minute. So forgive me while my brain warms up a little bit. Let's start with where we left off. Middle school into high school, but I'm going to focus mainly on high school because that's what I remember being a really impactful time for me and will be relevant in the conversation of religion. Again, I'm talking about what happened, and I'm also going to be touching on what I think of that experience now as a former Christian. So going off on tangents is quite a real possibility, and we're gonna roll with it. Okay. All right. I was homeschooled. So I did not have the opportunity to interact with children my same age from other religions, other belief systems, even other denominations of Christianity. I was very insulated. One could say isolated. It was because of this that I developed a very almost tribal mindset. I thought that my personal denomination of Christianity was the only right one, essentially the only right one, maybe a few others that were not denominational, or I don't know. There were certain denominations that I felt like if they came close enough to my theology, they weren't heathens, but I viewed most of Christianity, apart from being Southern Baptist, Reformed Baptist, as being heretical. I guess is a better word than heathens. I didn't think that Catholics were even born again Christians because they prayed to Mary. So I was in a bubble, and my only friends really were either my cousins who went to my church, or other kids in that church, or some girls that went to a Christian dance academy where all the same values were shared. Oh my god, I just remembered something. There was a dance teacher that I had at the time. If you're watching this, oh my gosh, I love you so much, and you're probably horrified about where I am now. But she was Catholic, and I remember cognitive dissonance probably started somewhere around here. I was like, she's such a nice person and she loves Jesus. How could she be Catholic? I don't understand. This is so sad. So yes, very, very, very close-minded at the time. I remember feeling pretty judged, and I was also judgmental. I was not allowed to date, and I remember receiving mixed signals and mixed messages about whether or not I should even have crushes on boys. Of course, I couldn't have crushes on girls, right? I mean, that goes without saying. I think my denomination condemned homosexuality outright, and not only that, I didn't even know what homosexuality was until I was about 13, and I was set up to view it in this horrifying light. It was talked about with such disgust and like horror and revulsion, and it's a perversion and all these things. So I was doomed from the beginning. But yeah, even having crushes on boys, I remember a few people telling me different things. I remember one person told me that it was not right to have a crush because it can lead to impure thoughts, and at such a young age, since I could, like probably like 14 or 15 at this point, because I was at that age and not able to get legally married, it was wrong for me to have a crush because there wasn't anything I could quote unquote do about it. I remember one person telling me this. I remember another person telling me like, no, it's okay, you can have crushes, you just have to be careful to not think impure thoughts. And at the time, I didn't really understand much about those sorts of things. So having impure thoughts for me would have only been like thinking about kissing a person. So sheltered. But I still remember feeling like, oh, I should feel ashamed for thinking or wanting to kiss this person. Like, I was so ignorant, I had no idea. But I remember, yeah, just a lot of internalized shame for feeling very, very natural, human, healthy feelings. Modesty was also a part of that. I was taught that I should be modest, and what that meant, it was very arbitrary, because some families that went to our church considered modesty being never wearing pants, just going in the nude, like wearing long skirts instead of pants. Some people thought that like not having a strap to your shirt was immodest. Some people thought that just a low-cut shirt was immodest. Some people thought that, this far above your knee was fine, but this far above your knee wasn't fine. It was all very arbitrary and confusing. And I remember feeling a bit annoyed that I couldn't just wear stuff that I felt cute in. Because sometimes it just missed this arbitrary mark and became immodest for some reason, even though I just thought it was cute. And so I remember modesty was a big issue for me in high school because I loved fashion and I loved feeling cute and pretty, and that was definitely a point of contention for me. I also remember being taught, along with the idea of being modest, it was very heavily implied that I was responsible for how men perceived me, for whether or not a man thought something impure about me. So there was sort of this burden of responsibility, even as a child, almost like my body is dirty and impure, and so I have to cover up so that men don't see parts of my impure, dirty body that make them impure and dirty. And so it created this really unhealthy relationship with my body and with consent. Unfortunately, I think it so deeply and negatively impacted me that it has been only in recent years, the past 3 years, I would say. I'm 26. It has only been in recent years that I have fully comprehended the idea of consent and culpability when it comes to harassment and SA and all of that stuff. Because of the things that I was taught about being modest and about taking responsibility for men's thoughts about me, I thought that clothing was, in a way, consent to be approached and in a predatory way. That if I wore certain clothing, I was sending out certain signals, and if anything happened to me, it was my fault because my clothes were saying something. It took me a really long time to realize that clothing is not consent, right? A yes, a verbal yes is consent, and only that. And so, yeah, that created a lot of issues with my self-esteem and my relationship with my body and with men in general. So I look back on that time in definitely sadness, but I also understand that it's important that parents teach their children what is and what is not socially acceptable. Certain situations call for certain dress, certain situations call for, whatever. There's circumstances that call for certain clothing that makes sense. I get that. Like wearing a bathing suit to a funeral is a clear no-no, right? But not, I think the problem that I have with the way that it was taught to me, or at least the way that I picked up on it, was the internalized shame that my body was inherently tempting, and I was a walking stumbling block. But again, yeah, only the past 3 years have I truly come to realize that concept, and it is because of this time in high school. And I want to do a longer episode about purity culture and about how it impacted me, because there is so much to say, and honestly I've gone off on a 10-minute tangent about this. The scars are really new, or are still very raw for me. I don't know if I have completely eliminated all that internalized shame about my body. I don't know. Those are still things that I'm trying to unpack, and I feel like there's so much more to say on that subject, so I want to just keep it moving for the sake of time. Also at this time, I thought that I was undergoing spiritual warfare because I loved music. I still love music. Music is my favorite thing. I think most people love music, but I didn't just want to listen to worship music. I wanted to listen to Demi Lovato, Taylor Swift, Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, Avril Lavigne, and these women were saying things that went against my religion in a way. They were saying things that were more secular. And I remember feeling very judged by certain people in my religious community that I would listen to these songs. And I also felt a lot of inner conflict too. And I remember at one point telling someone, hey, I realized that, this is so sad, I realized that the disciples would never listen to Avril Lavigne or Demi Lovato, so I shouldn't be listening to Avril Lavigne or Demi Lovato. And so for a short season, I really tried to stop listening to all secular music. That didn't last. I don't know why, but I felt like it was spiritual warfare, like Satan was trying to get me to be more worldly. That was also true with movies. There were certain movies that I wanted to watch that I wasn't allowed to. There were certain scenes of movies that had to be fast forwarded, that maybe I would go back and watch in secret, and the guilt and the shame because I knew that I wasn't supposed to really affected my self-esteem and my confidence. And I started to feel like everyone around me was able to be holier than me, and that I was just so sinful. Looking back on it now, I really wish I could go back and just give that younger version of myself a hug and say, girl, you're fine. I promise you, you are so normal. This is not something to be ashamed about, and you need to embrace it and just learn from it and give yourself some grace. But of course, at the time, it felt like, spiritual warfare. And when I say spiritual warfare, I mean my own flesh, my own sinful flesh, working kind of in tandem with satanic forces. So I took some of the responsibility myself by saying, well, this is the sinful nature that I was born with, but I also blamed some of it on the invisible forces of Satan that might have been at play too. I think wanting to listen to secular music, to popular songs, is very, very natural and is totally fine, right? Like, there's an aspect of growing up where you just want to be doing whatever is considered cool, and you want to explore new things because you're young and you're just experiencing the world for the first time, and there's an interest in things that are, what is a good word that I can use instead of sex? I'm going to say exual. I'm just going to take out the S. Things that are more exual. That is cringe. Okay, well, that's fine. That's our little word for it. There's, you're going through puberty and you're experiencing new feelings and curiosities, and all of that is normal. It's normal and it's harmless. It's harmless, right? It's a natural instinct that we have, and it makes me really sad that I felt so much shame for just being human. I also developed intense anxiety when I was about 16 for a variety of reasons. I developed anxiety, and I don't know if I was never diagnosed, right? So I don't want to say this was clinical anxiety or clinical depression, but I felt anxious and I felt depressed and I was not doing well. And I would read Bible verses that talked about not being anxious, right? Like, be anxious for nothing and everything. Bring the Lord your prayer and supplication. And I would just try to do that. I would try to pray to God and pray that he would fix it. And like, he wasn't. Like, prayers weren't doing anything. Reading those verses weren't doing anything except for making me feel worse about the fact that I was anxious, because I knew that God didn't want me to be anxious, but I felt like there's nothing I can do. I just am. And so I ended up going to therapy for just a few months before I went to college, because my anxiety was getting so bad. It felt debilitating. It was ruining my life. It was then that I started learning about psychology and the power of our self-talk, the power of perspective, limiting beliefs, and all those things. And that really helped me push through my personal form of anxiety that I had. I think mine was mostly in my head. It was mostly, I was driving myself crazy with my own thoughts. And so I didn't get on any medication at that point in time. I just figured out, like, oh, there's a way that I can actually, improve my mental health by working on my mental health. And there's more tools at my disposal than just reading Bible verses. My therapist taught me certain breathing techniques, meditation. She gave me recommendations of how to look at the world and myself, so much great practical advice that really wasn't rooted in scripture. And that began the journey for me towards self-help and personal development, which I don't think those things, and a major disclaimer here, I do not think that self-help and personal development are the cure to anxiety. Again, clinical anxiety, clinical depression, those things oftentimes need medication, and it's going to be different person to person. So, but for me, what helped was realizing that there were philosophies outside of and beyond Christianity that could help me cope with my day-to-day life. And so I started down that path of just working on myself and reflecting on my own beliefs and journaling, writing affirmations, listening to uplifting self-help gurus, and I guess there weren't podcasts at the time, but I would listen to people on YouTube talk, about inspirational things and how they, whatever, and you get it. Yeah, looking back, that was transformative for me. I finally started helping myself and not just going to God and saying, Lord, please fix me, right? Because that wasn't working. It just wasn't working. And so once I realized there were other tools at my disposal, my world opened up and I felt so much happier, and a lot of my mental health issues that I was having started to get better. At the time, I, of course, attributed my transformation to God. I just thought that God was using the tools of psychology and self-help to help me, right? Like it's kind of like people pray that God will bless a surgery, that he will make someone well, and when the surgery goes well, because the surgeon is a good surgeon, they give credit to the surgeon, but they're like, it's only because of God that you're even able to be a good surgeon. So it's this way of like saying, yes, I know there are naturalistic explanations for things, but I just believe that God is in control of all the naturalistic explanations. So that's how I sort of reconciled that transformation with my belief that Christ was enough for transformation at the time. In college, I was exposed to different types of people that I had never been around before. And it was a culture shock for me, to say the least. And I remember that college was very much so framed as a dangerous place for young people. It was framed as the place where faith and Christianity goes to die. Like they teach critical thinking and liberalism, and a lot of people lose their faith there, and they're surrounded by so many worldly people that they just can't keep their faith. And yeah, it's a really dangerous place for Christians. So I remember going into college with my mind made up that I was not going to lose my faith in those 4 years of attending college, no matter what, no matter who. I was going to stick to my beliefs. I was not going to change a single thing. And the reason I made my mind up to resist the change is because I tend to be a rebel at nature. A rebel by nature. I tend to resist authority. I tend to like to do my own thing. I tend to like to be independent and very much so an individual. That's just the way that I am. And so instead of looking at college as an opportunity to further my individuality, and learn things and change and accept other people's individuality, I viewed it as an opportunity to prove that people could change me, because I was strong. So I went into college being very close-minded, but this is where cognitive dissonance really started, because I was learning about things like cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, the right ways to conduct research, what bad research looks like, conflicts of interest. I was learning a lot of things. I was learning about biology, evolution. And again, I think I was prepared for college. I did well in college. Being homeschooled didn't put me at a disadvantage, but it did prevent me from learning about different viewpoints and engaging with people from different religions and different beliefs. So in that way, it was negative, but I didn't feel uneducated necessarily. I didn't feel unequipped to do well in college, but that's a whole nother conversation. So instead of going into college with an open mind, ready to learn, I went to college prepared to prove myself and to prove that I wasn't a weak Christian and that I could keep my faith even in the face of potential ridicule and contradiction from my peers and professors. But when I say my cognitive dissonance really began here in college, it began in my relationships with people. specifically my relationships with people who were gay. I found it so easy to like and love these gay people. And I also saw that they were being their authentic selves, that being gay was not a choice. It was just an expression of their natural way of viewing their natural sexuality. And seeing that really posed a threat to my belief that I had always held that being gay was a choice, that being gay was perversion, that being gay was a rejection of God's ultimate design for us as men and women. I wondered why being gay was wrong, especially when these people were so kind and just normal people, and also were seeking to be in consensual relationships with other consenting adults. I couldn't see the tangible harm in it. I just had to trust that there was some spiritual, intangible harm, and that I had to trust God and His Word. It didn't feel fair though, it didn't feel right, and to be honest, it made me really uncomfortable to think about my God sending these lovely gay people to hell because of their unrepentance. Apart from that, I started dating somebody. Spoiler alert, I ended up marrying this somebody. I started dating this person, my husband. I'll just call him my husband for sake of, future reference. I started dating my husband when I was 19. And this relationship very quickly became what most Christians would consider an impure relationship. I won't go into details about what we did, but you can use your imagination, I'm sure, and figure out that we were not being pure according to my church's biblical standards. And I remember feeling so much inner conflict about this because on one hand, I knew, or I thought that the Bible was pretty clear about any sort of physical acts before marriage was wrong and condemned by God and spiritually harmful. But on the other hand, the actual act of these physical acts felt very natural and loving and consensual and sweet, and just like it didn't feel wrong. It felt like an authentic manifestation of my love for this person. But I did have so much guilt, and I remember the first Sunday that I went to church after doing something that I thought was condemned by God, just sobbing uncontrollably, unable to participate in the Lord's Supper, and just feeling like, oh, I'm going to hell now. Like, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm impure. I have ruined it for myself. Like, I'm just this terrible, impure, ungodly woman. And so the shame and the guilt was like, it was unbearable. It was so harmful to me. The inner conflict and shame got so great that I finally decided I needed to confess to someone in my immediate religious circle that I had done something impure. That being said, I felt very comfortable talking to my friends at college about my experiences with my boyfriend at the time because we were all doing stuff like that, and it wasn't a problem. But when it came to my religious circle, I felt very on edge and very judged, and so I kind of developed like this split personality, one that I would put on and act all self-righteous and chaste around my religious peers, and then one where I felt very comfortable and free to be my true self around my more secular friends or more liberal friends at college. But I finally confessed to someone in my religious circle that I was doing impure acts with my boyfriend at the time. But I confessed it in this weird way where I was like, I read the verse, and I'm thinking maybe we've interpreted it wrong, right? Like, back in the day, they didn't have weddings, like legal weddings like we do today. And so really, it's just about being in a committed relationship. And I think that I am in a committed relationship. And so I can do these things without feeling guilty. but I was very much so talking about it, hoping for validation with kind of like a question mark at the end. And this person completely shot down my theory and told me that I knew what I was doing was wrong. And not only that, but I had ruined myself for my future husband, that I had betrayed my future husband, that I had done something I could never take back, never be healed from, and stolen something from my future husband. And sorry, like, trigger warning, I feel like even saying that, I didn't realize at the time, but like, that is so, I don't like to throw around the word abuse lightly. And I don't think that it was intended to be abusive. I think it came from a place of love and concern. But that sort of rhetoric is inexcusable. To tell a woman that she ruined herself by doing something physical before marriage, that she has wronged her future husband, that is so harmful. At the time, I felt convicted, right? That conversation convicted me of my guilt and made me feel shame, and I tried my best to stop doing those physical acts and to, I guess, try to save what was left of myself for my future husband, even though I had already ruined myself, apparently. I don't believe this anymore about myself, but I guess what makes me really sad is to think about all the girls who are currently being taught this. The young women who are being taught this, the girls, the children who are going to be taught this about themselves, and the way that they are going to feel. And I would never tell anyone how to raise their child. I would never tell anyone that you can't teach them religious principles, but my heart does go out to those young women and young girls who are going to have so much psychological baggage because of things that are said out of concern and love for their spiritual well-being. You are so much more than your past, what you have done in your past. You are so much more than your purity, your virginity. You are so much more than an object for men's pleasure and satisfaction. You are so much more than a pure wife, whatever that means. You are enough as you are. And if anyone in your life is telling you that you are beyond repair, or you are a dirty person because you do physical acts in a consenting relationship, in a consenting way with another human being, that person is harmful to you. And even if they don't realize it, that is harmful. And I would highly recommend that if you are realizing that you're surrounded by people who are intentionally trying to inflict shame and guilt on you for just being a normal human being, take some space from those people and go to therapy. Please, for your own well-being, for your mental health, for your self-esteem, you deserve that. Let's move on. So there was repentance and struggle there when it came to my romantic relationship. Just like a lot of conflict there. And at the time I thought that it was getting in the way of my relationship with God. And I felt like if I could only solve that problem, I would be close to God again. And looking back now, I realized that No, the problem was is that shame and guilt were projected onto me, and I was told the only solution was to stop being a normal person and to repress all of my natural desires, and only at that point could I have permission to feel right with God. And that was all arbitrary, and it was all put on me, and it had nothing to do with an actual spiritual relationship with God. And that's how I view it now. A couple years after this conversation, I was still in a relationship with my boyfriend, and our relationship was getting serious, and we were both growing as Christians. We decided, as many young Christian couples do, to get married. And we were in a circle of religious people where courting and dating, intending to marry with an intention to marry, is really important. And there's long relationships were looked down upon because it was thought that the longer you were in a relationship with somebody, the more likely it was you were going to do physical acts and maybe even live together. And so long-term relationships, even though they were committed, even though they might be loving, even though both individuals might love God and go to church and all of those things, if you weren't married legally, didn't have that signed piece of paper and the same last name, then you were living in sin. So we wanted to be together. We knew that marriage was in our future, but we were also living amongst a community of people who were very supportive of marriage. Like, as soon as you figured out that this is the person that you want to be with for a long time, you need to get married ASAP. I do think that being in a circle of religious people who take quite literally the verse that Paul writes, what is it? If you can't help yourself, essentially, if you burn with passion, it is better for those types of people to get married. If you are living, okay, I really do want to be careful and not give out advice. I just think it's dangerous, and here's why. Wanting to do physical acts is normal. It's natural. It is not a harmful thing when both parties are consenting and they're happy with the situation, right? And it's also none of anybody else's business outside of that relationship. And so if the community that you're in, the church that you're in, is inserting themselves into your personal romantic relationship and saying you need to get married because you guys clearly can't keep it in your pants, I would say, like, get a second opinion at the very least. Like, talk to somebody who isn't so, like, legalistic. I would, like, because marriage is a really big deal. And if you're just marrying somebody because you can't keep yourself from burning, that's a problem. So I just want to make that clarification. And I think actually my husband and I got really lucky. We married each other, and these 5 years that we've been married to each other, we've only been growing closer, and it's been beautiful. But I would just, a word of caution to anyone who is in this sort of situation that I was, it can feel very like a lot of pressure. Like, yeah, just a lot of pressure. Okay, so just a note there. So after getting married to my wonderful husband, I felt peace. I felt peace because at the time I thought that I was now right with God. I was like, I'm no longer committing this physical act, sin. I am right with God, and I also am a wife, and so I'm fulfilling the godly role that God has set forth for me in the Bible. It's a good thing to be a wife, and it's a good thing to submit to your husband, and now I'm doing that. So I felt holier, and I also I just felt like this was going to be a really great opportunity for me to get closer with God. Looking back now, I see it as just that peace that I felt was a very natural result from no longer feeling like the guilt and the shame projected onto me by my religious denomination could apply. And I felt like people were pleased with me, and if people were pleased with me who were religious and read the Bible, then God was also pleased with me. So it was sort of like I was just like falling into line, and I felt more at peace because of that. I've changed a lot. I'm very much so not a fall in line type gal anymore, but at the time I was. Probably had a little bit to do with the threat of hell, but anyways. My husband and I found a really good church, and we got more plugged in to a church than I'd probably been like at least since high school. I was very excited about our church group, and I also just started studying the Bible more, listening to different theologians, and just trying to grow deeper in my relationship with God. I remember whenever I would have questions about the Bible, like I remember one question in particular was, is the earth 6,000 years old, or is it, what is it, like 7 billion years old, or is it 13 billion years old? I remember listening to a really good debate. I can't remember the two people. I know one of them was Hugh Ross. Hugh Ross was way more convincing to me personally than the person that was arguing for the creationist model. So yeah, Hugh Ross made a lot more sense to me in that debate. His argument that the earth was actually really old, and that maybe each creation day was actually millions of years, and it was just, I don't know, poetic language or something. And so I remember at that point in time, I started having a more open-minded view of Christianity as a whole. I started thinking that maybe it's not just my denomination of Christians that are going to go to heaven. Maybe there's some nuance and there's some different ways to look at things and interpret the Bible. And I don't have to be so scared of interpreting the Bible in new ways. So that was nice. I definitely started feeling a little bit more open-minded, but I still felt like my interpretation was probably the best one. But as long as other people accepted that they were sinners and they needed Jesus and they repented on his name, they were good. And the rest was just sort of like the details and like background noise. At this point in my Christian walk with the Lord, sorry, that was annoying. At this point in my Christian walk, if you will, I would have defined myself without any denomination. If you had asked me, are you a Christian? What do you believe? I would have said, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and I try to live my life in alignment with his will, and I use the Bible to figure out what I need to do. So if I'm anything, I'm a biblical Christian with a personal relationship with Jesus. And I think that for me, this was just a long-winded way of saying, hey, look how spiritual and great and correct I am. I don't need to be in a denomination because I just have a relationship with Jesus. I'm not religious. I have a relationship with Jesus. It was just this little way of trying to like avoid being lumped into a group, because I didn't want people to assume a bunch of things about my theological beliefs. And I also just wanted to emphasize that I felt like having a relationship with Jesus was the most important thing, and that religion was something that was way more legalistic and just unnecessary. But I don't think I really understood that what I was doing was actually just describing a religion. Coming to a close on the story of my religious experience before becoming, I haven't said what I am. Ooh, maybe I'll start the next episode talking about where I am. Yeah, I don't want to say that right now. So anyways, this is kind of what was going on about 2 years, the 2 years before I started deconstructing, because that's going to be a whole lot. Cognitive dissonance definitely increasing all the time, increasing every day. Okay. And I think there's like a few reasons why my cognitive dissonance was increasing. So let me just quickly define cognitive dissonance. Let me look it up, because I think I know what it means, but you know how sometimes you're like, I know what that means, and then you like really, really don't, and then you embarrass yourself in an argument because you're like so certain. Cognitive dissonance. Let's see, let's find a good Psychology Today. They would know. Cognitive dissonance is a term for the state of discomfort felt when two or more modes of thought contradict each other. The clashing cognitions may include beliefs, ideas, or the knowledge that one has behaved in a certain way. So that was increasing quite a bit, and I think there were a few reasons why. So number one, I started watching TikTok. I know what you're thinking. The fuck? TikTok was the first time in my life where I started getting exposed to so many different types of people who weren't celebrities, weren't influencers, weren't famous, were just normal, everyday people. And I started to realize how awesome people really are. How funny, how thoughtful, how sweet, how much alike we all are. So I would just see these videos and just be laughing and reading the comment section and laughing. I would be amazed at like how many experiences as human beings we share, and like the memories that were being like stirred up in my mind from childhood, and like I didn't know we had all so many of the same experiences. Like really, I just felt like I, for the first time in my life, was really starting to like people, because I'd always said in the past like, oh, like just people get on my nerves, like I just want to be left alone, like oh people. But TikTok was making me start to realize how like we're all the same, and some of us have bad days. Not some of us, all of us have bad days and do things that we regret. All of us have embarrassing moments. All of us have quirks. I don't know, it was blowing my mind. I was really starting to feel like we're just this collective being almost. Like, how can so many people have the same thoughts and experiences and feelings? It was kind of cool. A lot of these people too, I was realizing, are not Christian, or they don't believe in the same version of Christianity that I do. And I was struggling to reconcile the fact that like these are lovely people who I want wonderful things for. I wish the best for, but are also evil, depraved people who deserve to burn in hell for eternity. That was where my cognitive dissonance really started like flaring up, I guess. I was like, these people, they're atheists and agnostics and Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and Catholics who are all just like me. Yet I'm gonna get to go to heaven and all of them are gonna burn in hell? This doesn't feel right. How is this good? I also started living kind of worldly lifestyle about a year and a half, 2 years before I deconstructed from Christianity. So I was drinking more, cussing a lot. I also remember a turning point in my worldly lifestyle where the alarm bell started going off and I realized that I was slipping down a slippery slope. I watched Bridgerton, and so this was probably in like 2021, I think Bridgerton came out, and I loved it. I mean, this show, like, and I still love it to this day. I'm so excited. I think May 1st, the like little Queen Charlotte Bridgerton cover. I'm stoked. But at the time, I watched it and I loved it, and I recommended it to some Christian friends, and they watched it. And I remember, like, maybe it was a conversation or it was just something that I realized. I was like, I'm getting so comfortable with being worldly. The fact that I recommended this show to to my Christian friends, like unabashedly, like, girl, I guess at the time, like, this was the most raunchy, steamy stuff that I had ever recommended to another person. And I was like, wow, I'm really getting worldly. Like, I think this is a problem. So I remember being like, wow, I've changed so much. Like, where is my godly Christian girl conscience gone? And then, like, a few pretty impactful things happened in my personal life. I have in my notes, shit hit the fan. And like, I started questioning, not everything, but a lot. I just started questioning myself, like, who am I? What is the type of person I'm becoming? I started questioning the people around me, who they were. Just felt like I was at a really important decision-making turning point in my life, that the type of person that I choose to be now is probably going to determine the rest of my life, and is probably going to determine the type of person that I am for the rest of my life. And yeah, my personal life felt pretty unstable, and it was a hard year. I was like, I need to clean up my act. I need to make sure that I'm not becoming just like worldly and a bad person. Like, I want to be a good Christian. I want to follow God's will for my life. Like, all these things. I need to take some time for myself. And so we started going to this new church, and I loved it. I loved this new church, and I felt like this is just what I need. I need like new teaching, a new community. We went there for probably about 7 or 8 months before I started deconstructing. That's where I'm going to end it for this episode, because I really want to get into detail about what started my deconstruction, most important journey that I've ever taken in my life, and I want to do it justice. But just on a final note, yeah, for those 7 months, I took time to myself. I started seeing a therapist. Of course, I was going to that new church, and I was really, it was like project reset mode, project figure out who I am, project get my life sorted, because I want to be a good Christian. And look where we ended up. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And I will talk to you in the next one. Bye.